Welcome to the Demography Today lecture series, co-organized by the BBVA Foundation and the Horizon 2020 LOMPOP project and the Spanish National Research Council. And we are very lucky today to have here Shuzhuo Li, who is currently University Distinguished Professor of Population and Development Policy Studies and Director of the Institute for Population and Development Studies at Xi'an Jiaotong University in China, and Consulting Professor at the Morrison Institute for Population and Resources Studies at Stanford University. He received his PhD in System Engineering in 1991 from Xi'an Jiaotong University in China, and he is member of the Social Science Committee of the Chinese Ministry of Education. And his research is focused on population and development, as well as public policies in contemporary transitional China, including population policies, aging and health, migration and urbanization, gender and development, ecosystem services, and human well-being. So it's a great pleasure to have you here and to talk about China and migration in China and aging in China, especially here at the Spanish National Research Council, that we have a kind of strong ties with the Chinese Academy of Social Science on these topics. So it will be very interesting to see other views. As usual, we have between 45 minutes to 1 hour talk, and then we open the floor for questions. Welcome to CESEC.
Thank you, Professor Ramiro. Thank you for your nice introduction. And it's a great honor for me to be invited to come to visit this well-known institute on economics, geography, and demography. And also thank my friends, David and Miguel, and who introduced me to come to this well-known institute, and also give me an opportunity to speak in the Population Demography Today lecture series. And it's a great honor. And Professor Ramiro told me to prepare a kind of 1 hour talk, and then have 30 minutes open for discussion and questions. And also, he said specifically that this is kind of lecture series mostly for students, for junior and demographer researchers. So I actually, at the beginning, I thought I'm going to talk about aging issues in China, because I think aging is a kind of global issue facing all of the human beings in the world. But then I thought that migration might be a more important issue relating China and Europe. So I thought I'm going to talk about migration, integration, health, and policy in China. I will actually talk about 4 topics today. So actually I combined 3 topics, 3 talks for the same talk for students, because I want to show how can we do research in policy, in academic research, and to serve the people and serve for the government, and also to try to change. So I'm going to talk about 4 topics today: migration, integration, health, and policy. I think that I may focus mostly on the first part, the internal migration in China, probably using 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. I want to talk about what's the historical background of Chinese migration and dynamics about temporal trend, spatial pattern, and also who are they? Who are migrants in China? I mean the domestic migrants. Then I will talk about more about how do I understand the context of migration in China, and what kind of framework we have been adopted, and what kind of research we have been doing. I'm talking about migration today here, not only on behalf of me. Actually, I'm giving a talk on behalf of my research team, not only research of Chinese, but also international, including international collaborators over the last 20 years in my institute. Then I will show, actually I'm going to, after I talk about the migration framework and research framework and policy in China, I actually want to show the 3 case studies that we have been working. One for national government on social integration. This is a kind of research project, a kind of collaboration between Chinese government and the EU, but mostly Germany. So that's kind of, we want to adopt EU opinion and experience to try to see how we can apply the EU's model for integration for international immigrants to help resolve problems coming from the domestic migrant workers in China. So that's kind of national efforts, international efforts between China and the EU. And we, in my institute, was part of the member of the committee for steering that research project. It's not only for research, actually it's a practical project. I'm going to talk about a research that we have been working on, still going on, to study how integration affects health, because right now the health is a big issue in China. Then I'm going to talk about one research that we did for the provincial government to see that how provincial government wants to adopt policy, to implement policy, and to evaluate policy, and how they want to improve the policy to improve the human well-being of the migrant workers in the province. So last three, actually, this is three separate studies, but on the same line. So we want to show how we can use this academic research to work for the different parties in China. It's kind of three case studies. Let me start with internal migration in China. I'm not sure how many of you have you been to China, and how many of you have heard China. If you want to understand the context of Chinese migration within China, one important term you have to understand is the hukou system. The hukou is actually is what we call the household registration system. So it's hu means a household, a family. Kou means people in China. So that means that people, how many people, each individual people in one household, in one family in China. This kind of system that we learned from the former Soviet Union. I think that a couple of other socialist countries also adopted this system, like Vietnam. But Vietnam abolished this system 2 years ago. But China still has this system going on. But we have been trying to reform this system. So basically, hukou is kind of record of an individual's registration, classification, and registration location, usually being passed from one generation to the next. So that's a kind of significant work around 2000. It's quite a complex system, but basically, the hukou means that who you are, where you should be, what you can do, and what you will be benefit from what you've been doing there. So it's a very complicated system. But basically, in the past, hukou actually divides the Chinese societies into two societies, urban and rural societies. For instance, let's just give you one example. For instance, I'm an urban person. I come from Xi'an. So even right now, hukou is still very important, even after 40 years of reform. I have a hukou in Xi'an, so I'm allowed to buy one apartment in Xi'an. But even I'm an urban person, if I go to Shanghai, I cannot buy an apartment there because I don't have a hukou there. I'm not registered there. So my household is registered in Xi'an. So that's why I said that the hukou is kind of a very complex system. It tells you what you can do and what you cannot do, and what kind of benefits you will have. So because, for instance, my hukou is in Xi'an, my pension comes from Xi'an city government, from local provincial government. And if you are registered, even, for instance, working, for instance, in Spain for many years, when I go back, my pension still comes from local governments of Shanxi province, not from, for instance, I go to Shanghai. Shanghai government doesn't cover my pension. So this is only one example for what we call a social benefit program. So related to everything. For instance, if you don't have hukou, your child cannot go to local schools because you are not registered here. So this is very complicated. I will give you more example. But if you want to understand the human well-being part of the migration, not only the numbers and the flows and the patterns, then you need to understand why and hukou is so important in China. So I'm going to give you, after I explain the hukou, I'm going to give you example of the historical background of the internal migration in China. So I classify them into the 4 stages, 50 to 78, a planned economy, and stage 2, 78 to 1990, early periods of the reform. And 1990 to 2010 is kind of very rapid economic growth over the last 20 years. Then starting from 2010, it's kind of we enter into a new stage called a social transition period. So we're looking at not only the income, jobs, occupation, but also look at education, pension, social welfare, and health, and so this kind of stuff. I go them very quickly. The 1950 to 78 is actually I live in that area when I was young. So, but it's quite similar to many former Soviet states. So hukou at that time, hukou functions 2 ways. First, it prevents you from floating. So you have to stay where your household registration is, where your hukou is. So that means that at that time that basically hukou system doesn't allow you to move freely. You have no choice. Only governments ask you to move. For instance, if you join the army, government asks you to move from one village to the army. Then that's what we call government-sponsored, agreed, approved migration. Another important issue that all benefits are rationed by the hukou system. For instance, if I hukou, because plan economy, everything was in short. So if you want to have food, you have a coupon. How many coupons you can have is based on hukou, and based on how many people in the household, and age and gender. So that's kind of very similar to what we learned from the former Soviet Union, exactly the same. The second period is about 78 to 1990. It's kind of beginning stage of Chinese economic reform. So at that time that hukou system was relaxed. That means that you are free to some extent to move, but mostly from rural to urban. But from urban to urban, still very hard. Even right now, still hard. If you want to move to Shanghai for a very formal job, it might be okay for me because I'm a professor, but for others, it's still very, very hard. And you can find a job there, but your household registration cannot move with you. Because Shanghai is kind of top 3 cities in China. Then we go to the 1990 to 2010, the third period. This period, actually, governments encourage farmers to move because the China joined WTO around 2000. So at that time, the industry, the rural enterprises all collapsed. So the newly invested companies coming from the other countries, the direct investment, requires a lot of labor in the urban area, especially in coast area. But we didn't have that much of the labor available for the urban growth. So that's why government encourages a lot of surplus farmers to move from rural to urban area to work there. But their household registration cannot go with them. So they just want some people to work. So that's a kind of very important period. See the numbers here. You see that the number of migrant workers increased from 20 million to 220 million. So 220 million is a big number. I think it's the largest migrant group in the world within one country. Of course, China is big in terms of population size, but still the proportion is big because that means that for every 7 people, 1 person is leaving the countryside for more than 6 months, doesn't live with their native family. So it's 1 out of 7. So that's quite a huge number. Then we coming from the 2010, then the social transitional period. So that means that the growth rate is stable. So the number of the migrants actually are stable, but they require a lot of more. For instance, they have been working in Shanghai, in Beijing for 30 years. They have nothing there except for income. So they want to more. They want to housing, education, pension, medical insurance. They want to local participation of local elections. They can have the rights to. They want to have the rights for a lot of things, but that's very hard for the local governments. Central governments want to push, but local governments are resistant, because, for instance, Shanghai, they have more than 20 million people, sometimes 30 million, depending how do you measure the local people. Maybe the real local permanent residents with local hukou, local household, only maybe 10 million. So if you have so many people, they have been working here, they pay tax, but they don't want anything back. But suddenly one day said, oh, I also should have whatever the local people have. Then it's kind of a huge demand. The government cannot have this kind of enough resources available. For instance, pension. They don't have enough money for so many. So that's a very complex system in China. Conflicts between central government and local governments, and conflicts among the local governments, among the poor and rich, among the coast to the mountain areas. I think this kind of domestic politics and exists everywhere, not only in China. So what are the? So that's kind of background that I hope that we can understand that the Chinese migration background. Now I'll show you very quickly that what are the temporal pattern and the spatial pattern of Chinese migration. First, this is a kind of historical figure of the domestic migrants in China from 50 to 27. So phase two, phase one, phase two. So the real migration start with phase three. Phase three. So within 20 years, increase from 20 million to 220 million. Then stabilize around 240 million over the last 7 to 10 years. So that's for the internal migrants, including urban to urban migrants. Because if a hukou is not coming with you, then you are migrants. If a hukou is going with you, you are not migrants. So migrants Chinese term has a specific meaning. That means person going to another place, but without hukou going with you. So that's a specific definition. And here we also see the rural urban migrants. So basically in the planned economy, zero. Nobody can move. Nobody can move. And in the early stage of reform, very few people can move. Actually starting from 1990, from 3 million to 242 million. And steady growth is about 280 million. So this number is bigger than the internal migration because they have a different definition. So this includes that you move from agriculture to industry, even you are still living in the local area. So it's also called migration from industries. So because farmers in China, it means that you live in the rural area, but also work in agriculture. That's farmers, what they're supposed to be doing. If you still live in the same country, same place, but work for the company, a factory, then you are regarded as also kind of migration. This is a map of China. So basically we have coast area of China and the central area of China and the west part of China. So that's help you understand the Chinese geography and also economics and economy. So I use a paper written by Professor Shen Jianfa in Hong Kong. And he and his colleagues had a couple of figures that show you very easily to understand the spatial pattern of the Chinese migration. So that's you see that the big dark spot, that means the cities. That means cities. So starting from 85, 90, 95, 2000, and 2005, for the every five-year period, you can see the increase and intensified migration from the central and the west part of China to the east part of China. So this map actually shows you more clearly. So that's the movement from at the beginning, from central China to coast and the east part of China. And right now, around 2010, it's actually coming to 3 major areas of China. One is Beijing. So Beijing is still kind of very important destination for Chinese domestic migrants. Here is the Shanghai area. We call it Yangtze River Delta. So this is one of the most developed areas in Asia right now. And here is Guangdong area, Guangzhou and Shenzhen. So that means that in China, right now we have 4 major, what we call the Line 1 frontier cities: Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. These 4 cities we call the top 4 cities in China. They have a very strict policy right now. So hukou system, very rigid there. It's very hard for you to go there. It's okay for you to go there to work, but it's very hard for you to get a local registration, local household registration, local hukou. So why these 4 cities important? I'm not sure if I've heard Shenzhen before, but you may have heard Huawei. Huawei is from Shenzhen. So Shenzhen is the most innovative city in China. And last year, its GDP exceeds Hong Kong for the very first time. So Shenzhen right now is more important than Hong Kong in Chinese economy. So Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai right now are also among the top 10 most expensive cities in the world. The housing market is very hot. So that's why they are controlling who can buy the local apartments. Many people want to go there to buy. So that's why only local people with hukou can buy 1 or 2 apartments. So that's maximum. So that is see that how domestic migration plays a role in China to stimulate economic booming. So who are the migrants? Here I'm show you very quickly that first long-term residence becomes more common. Over the last 40 years, the second generation right now account for a half in 2017. What we call second generation. Second generation is very important. It means because at the beginning of the migrants, they were farmers. They moved from rural area to rural area. They are kind of circular migrants. So they work in the urban areas, but when the harvest time comes, they go back and still working for the harvest. So they were basically farmers. But what we call second generation, either they were born in cities, but they are farmer hukou, okay? Or they were born in a rural area, but they go to school. After graduation, they don't go to college. They go to city directly. They know nothing about farming. They are not farmers. That's why we call the second generation. So second generation about half. Then another important phenomenon that what we call familiarization for migration. So right at the beginning, only individual person from one household. At the beginning, woman, then husband, man, they go together, family without children. Right now, more and more whole family coming together to the urban China. So that's kind of new phenomenon. And here I can show you an age pyramid. Shows you exactly what we call dynamics of the age cohorts for migrants over the last 40 years of China. Here from 2000, here 2017. You see that there's some kind of new phenomenon. First, there are more and more old people and young people coming to urban area. They also might be kind of a natural, the same age cohorts, but growing older over the last 20 years. So that's the kind of, in the past, the government only need to provide jobs for the adults. Right now, they need to provide provide healthcare, pension, Medicare for the old people, but also schooling, education for the little children and the daycare center. So this is a lot of new things. Why we call it, it's called a social transitional period. And for the education, it's basically mostly half of them are junior secondary. So that's for education. And why they move? They mostly for work, and also coming for business. So in the past, when you talk about migrants, it's mostly for the low pay and dirty jobs. But right now, there are a lot of people are working, even in Shanghai, in Beijing, in the big cities, that they are doing business. So a lot of very rich farmers, they work in the urban area. They have their own business. Then we have, but still they're mostly on the manufacturing and construction. So there's traditional industry work sectors for the migrants. And this one is very interesting. It shows you the difference between the local people and migrants. So they have a high coverage. This is called the social welfare programs in China. So for the migrants, 90% have medical care, half for pension. Then it's very low for other what we call this is called the 5 insurance plus 1 fund. That's China's what we call social security system. So you see that the migrants have a very low coverage in most of the social welfare programs in China, especially in what we call the house provision fund. So this is very important. That means that the government helps you to contribute some money when you want to buy an apartment in the urban area. So how do we understand the context of migration in China? So that's I just introduced the background of Chinese migration, domestic migration in China. So starting from here, I want to show you how do we, in my institute, my group, how do we understand the context of migration in China? I think that when we talk about migration, we cannot only talk about migration, not only talk about numbers and the flows and the patterns. When you think about first demographic transition in China, it's a very complex issue right now. Right now, we have a very low fertility. Government just changed family planning policy 2-3 years ago. But right now, it's a problem that people don't want to give birth, so they don't want to marry. So that's one issue. Another is aging society. So the fastest growth group is the old people, 80 plus. That's for China. They have an urban society. Right now, the urbanization rate is around 60%. But this 60%, including a lot of migrants working in the urban area, they don't have local hukou. Then we have floating society I just introduced. We also have a gender imbalanced society. We have more males than females. That's also a big issue. It is estimated that at around 2050, more than around 50 million men cannot get married for lifetime, forever, what we call a bachelor society. Then have a small family society. So that's what we call demographic transition. They have economic transition. Chinese economy is quite tough right now because we have a trade war with the United States. And also, even without the war with the United States in trade, we actually have our own problem because right now, the per capita income of Chinese is around $10,000 right now. So we don't know whether we will continue the path of most countries that are falling into a trap, what we call middle income trap, or we can just like other, what we call the East Asia country path, like Singapore, like Korea, like even Chinese, Taiwan, that you can continue to grow that into a developed country. So that's what we call, you have to upgrade our industries from exporting industry to domestic industry to high-tech industry. That's why Huawei is so important for China, because the kind of example that Chinese enterprise can lead the advancement of technology in China. Then we also have a new blueprint for urbanization. We want to bring Chinese society to a fully urbanized society. Then we have social transition. That's what the new governments, the current governments, emphasize on. They want to have social equity and justice. They want to have equalization of basic public services like pension, Medicare, education, everything. I already show you some that a lot of migrant workers cannot enjoy the benefits of local people. And also we have poverty alleviation and poverty eradication program. So this administration, they claim that at the end of next year, we will eradicate the people in the absolute poverty. This is the number one, what we call social engineering in China right now, called poverty alleviation program. Then we have gender and vulnerability and poor. So this is called, so what I meant that migration is kind of interlinked with a lot of other things, demographic transition, economic development, and also social transition. So that's why everything is so complicated and so tough in China. Of course, not only in China, in every country. But I think that if you look at the past 40 years, Chinese society really has entered into a new stage. We have so many different choices. We want to know where we should continue to grow. So that's what my own framework that I said that I want to show that migration starts with hukou system, mostly for internal migration. Then we need to think about integration. So migration integration, policy, and equalization for basic public policies. So this is kind of migration, integration, and we also need to look at human well-being. Because in the past, we only look at whether you have jobs, what contribution can you make to a local society. Right now, we need to look at the migrants' human well-being. And also in terms of the policy innovations along this, like hukou, like public services, and also what we call the human-oriented urbanization, and especially Healthy China 2030. It's a new national strategy in parallel with Chinese poverty alleviation policy. So that's what I saw that from policy, from governance, from people, from migration to integration to human well-being. Currently, I have to show you a little bit more about what government is trying to do for the migrants, because at the end I want to show you a very small case study about policy evaluation. The first, the hukou reform policy. So right now, number one, expand the social welfare program to migrants. Number one, hukou reform. Hukou has been reforming over the last 40 years, but not substantial advancement, because every city wants people to come to work for the city. They don't want to have them to have local hukou, because they don't want them to share to share the benefits of local people. So that's one issue. But last month is a very important policy document was just released that the government will try to abolish the hukou, not abolish, try to reform the policy. So everybody can have a hukou freely in small cities. So we have 4 levels. Small cities, everybody is okay. What we call the small city, maybe around 1 to 3 million. Okay, then we have a little bigger one. Maybe it's okay if you have a job, you can have a hukou. If you are, for instance, college students, you can have hukou. Then like a big city like Xi'an, we're around 9 million right now, but the city said it's too small for China, for Xi'an, so we want to be a 10 million city. If you want to 10 million, you will be recognized as an international city in Chinese system. So right now, for instance, my city government has a new policy that everybody, if you have a college education, you can have a local hukou. So it's easily, you don't need to have work. You don't need to have job. Then we have number 1, what we call level 1 cities at Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. These 4 cities will continue to control the hukou, but it will relax. So we have what we call a point system that will reach some points. For instance, if you live here for 20 years, you pay tax for 30 years, and you have a house, you have an apartment, and if your family are all here, you can have a local hukou, but it's still very hard. So that's what we are reforming hukou. Then we have social insurance, education, housing, and then we have also state council set up a leading group on migrant workers. That's very much Chinese system. That if I have a leading group there, that means this is very important in Chinese system. Everybody will respect this part of the work. Then we have also migrant-specific institution in ministries. So we have 2 ministries have specific departments to look after, to take care of the issue for migrants. One is the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. This is very powerful ministry in China, and also National Health Commission of China. They both have their ministries. Then we also have a pilot program for integration. That's also a kind of program between EU and the Chinese government. And also in the past, when we talk about domestic migration, most means rural to urban. Right now we have very much diversified migration. We have regular labor migration, used to be rural to urban, but right now also urban to urban, increasing numbers of people moving from urban to urban area. And also we have huge marriage migration. We have relocation migration for ecological conservation, poverty elevation, engineering projects, and natural disaster avoidance projects. For instance, in over the last 5 years, governments already relocated more than 10 million people from poor area, to the small towns. So 10 million. So that's what we call number one project in China. We also have international migration is coming in. 2 years ago, Chinese government, for the very first time, established a national bureau on immigration. In the past, we didn't have immigration. We only have what we call Bureau of Enter and Exit. That's how. So it only control the border. Right now, you need to have the system for green card system for foreigners. So that's internal migration. And when we look at people who have migrants, left behind children, women, elderly, and involuntary bachelors, and also cross-border brides coming from the neighboring countries, because I just mentioned that we are kind of gender imbalanced society. We have substitute males looking for the marriage, and also we have poor and rural society. So basically, what I'm thinking about that we need to look at integration, economic, cultural, social, and identity and psychological. And we also need to look at the human well-being, not only income. So we nominate 7 important issues: income and distribution, livelihood, support, health, risk and resilience, security and safety, and poverty. So that's also the new government is looking at all these kind of important issues. Why I said within the last 10 years, we enter a new stage of social transitional period of Chinese migrants, because we're looking at not only the jobs and the income, we're also looking at all other things related to the human well-being. So this is the paradigm that we have been adopting, trying to do things for governments, for the people. We look at, we actually combine research, academic research, policy analysis, experiments, policy implementation, and also national strategy for the social problems related to the vulnerable groups like internal migrants and vulnerable people related to migration. So, for instance, look at how relocation program affects the human well-being of old people in the rural area. That's one example. So we also work with international partners, and also we work with NGOs in China. Currently, I have led 4 major projects. I hope that my visit to here may bring some kind of collaboration in future between China and Spain and also Europe. One is about migrant integration and human well-being. I've been working with the Chinese government, local governments, for over the last 10 years. Another is about relocation, ecosystem services, and poverty elevation. I've been working with Stanford Natural Capital Project over the last 15 years to look at how relocation of poor people integrate with the ecosystem services and to help for what we call the dual civilization, like economic civilization and also ecological civilization in China. Then we look at migration, aging, and human well-being. That's a kind of 20-year project. I've been working with USC and American institutions to try to look at how migration affects the well-being of the life behind old people and the children. So, and also looking at impact on the migrants. The last one, I've been working with INET in France, and also I've been working for more than 15 years to look at how migration, gender play a role in the development. This is mostly for the bachelors, looking at bachelors in China, bachelors and also gender roles in China. So these are 4 major projects. The next I will show you very quickly that within this background, within this kind of what we understand as the Chinese migration, and what kind of framework and paradigm we have been adopting, what projects are going on. I show you at 3 small case studies that to show that how we work with partners on migration related problems in China. One is the social integration. This is a kind of monitoring project working with the EU and Chinese national governments. So basically, in China, we define social integration as kind of decline of an intergroup distinction between urban residents and rural urban migrants in terms of the social cultural dimensions that are specific to China. So actually in EU, when we work with the EU colleagues, the EU has its own definition of integration for international immigrants, but we actually change a little bit specifically to the Chinese context. So basically look at 3 layers. One is acculturation, so cultural integration, socioeconomic integration, and a psychological integration. So these are 3 major dimensions of integration in China. And here I'm using 2 national surveys. One is what we call the comprehensive survey for migrant dynamics survey by the Chinese Ministry of Public Health. So this is kind of an annual monitoring survey for migrants. The question, the samples include 200,000 households. So that's it. Then in specific year, in year 2013, we worked with the EU and we did a special survey on social integration of migrants in 8 major cities in China. So I used the sample here to show you very roughly that what we show. First about the acculturation. So basically we have we use dialect preference and also individual modernity. So this is kind of international measurements, but we adapt them to the Chinese context. So basically that you see that about more than half they prefer to accept urban customs. So that's what we call the modernity. And then more than half cannot speak local dialect. Because China, we speak Mandarin, but local dialect is very, very strong in China. Sometimes people don't understand each other if you speak local dialect. But if you write down, it's the same thing. The character is the same. Then we like socioeconomic integration. So I think this map is more important. So see the rural urban migrants makes more money than the local urban residents. So, but their hourly payment is lower. So that's because that migrants in the urban area, they work longer. They work longer. So that's one integration. Then if we compare to the occupational status, you see that home ownership for the migrants is only 7%, very, very low. And non-manufacturing labor is only 20%. So that means that social status and economic status is still much lower for migrants in China. And then we have psychological integration. It's interesting that they feel that the migrants feel that they belong to the local society. They have a sense of belonging is quite high, it's around 92%. But with the local, but how much they feel they're really local is much lower. It's only 75%, but still better. So that is what we used from the integration monitoring project, working with the EU. I don't have time to talk about policy implications because I only want to show you the example. Because resulting from this project, the central government of China actually has released a lot of policies for the different provinces to try to improve the integration of the migrants into urban society, following the EU's model, but mostly a German model. Another example I want to show you is that how do we link acculturation and mental health together? We also did a similar project on physical health, but the physical health is very much different because physical health is strong selection effects because only migrants strong enough, they can work first. So usually their physical health status is much, much better than the local people on average. That's why we later on we moved the research from physical health to mental health. And so we want to know, it's still going on project that yesterday actually I gave Professor Ramiro 2 papers. One paper already published about social integration in English, and also I gave him one draft, still going on paper. It's kind of collaboration between us and 2 foreign professors about how do we study acculturation and mental health. It's a still going on project paper, but basically we really want to look at how integration affects mental health problem. So it's basically here we use a Bayes model. So we have two bicultural model. So you have culture of sending country, and now you have culture of the receiving area. So because of the cultural contact, that's what we call acculturation. You have what we call 4 categories, both high integration, both low marginalization, one high, one low assimilation, one low, one high separation. So that is what they use for studying the immigrants, not for domestic migrants. So we want to see that whether this kind of Bayes model on integration, cultural integration, and health for international immigrants, whether this can be applied to the Chinese domestic immigrants, domestic migrants in Chinese context. So we argue that because of even people feel that, oh, you are Chinese, you are same. But actually we are not same, especially between urban and rural. So we show that the culture are different in urban and rural. It's mostly related to the Hukou system, mostly related to Hukou. We also show that they are 2 different groups in terms of identity. So even for instance, if we go to Shanghai, they always, I'm not sure if we go to Shanghai. I know that David and Miguel went to Shanghai. The Shanghai people, the real local Shanghai people, are very proud themselves. They said everybody coming from the West is rural people, including people in the urban areas of other surrounding areas like Suzhou, Hangzhou. They also say, oh, rural people. So they're very snobby people of local Shanghainese. So there are 2, the identities are different. That's what we argue. And they also have a regular cultural context. And then we assume that they have a cultural change in terms of behavior, value, and identity. So basically, we are following the Bayes model to see whether this can be applied to Chinese context. So here is our kind of framework that from the rural culture, cultural integration through practices, values, and identifications to the urban culture. So it's kind of bicultural and multidimensional framework of acculturation. And then we want to show that how acculturation affects health. So this is kind of conceptual model we have been using that we are arguing that acculturation will affect the mental health through social support, culturative stress, and SES, socioeconomic status. So this is a conceptual model. But this is not based on Barry. It's actually based on our own construction of the Chinese conceptual model based on Chinese context. And then we have a lot of, so basic questions is three. First, whether this Bayes model can be applied to Chinese domestic migrants. Second one is that whether four categories exist there. So third one is that whether they have causalities or maybe associations. So the data, this data coming from our own survey. We did a survey in Guangzhou. I don't go through the details of the survey. I just want to, we also have a measurement of the culture and a lot of similar variables. But I just want to show the results. It's very interesting. So using the latent classification method, cluster method, we did see that. So this is a kind of originally proposed four categories by Barry: assimilation, integration, separation, and marginalization. But using our sample from Guangzhou survey, we classify them into four categories, but two integration and two on separation. So C1 for rural-oriented integration, C2 for urban-oriented integration, and C3 is integration potential separation, and C4 is marginalization risk separation because it's closer to the marginalization. So this is kind of four major categories. They're different from international immigrants, but it's a kind of, so basically in China it's mostly either you are integration or separation. We think that this is kind of more sound based on Chinese context. So that's what we use the cartoon to show that at the beginning, this kind of rural person, these are urban people. After acculturation, you either go to separation or you either go to the integration. So this Chinese culture means here that cities are all of us, not only for local people. And we see this interesting that if you look at the mental health, social support, and SES by four clusters, you see that rural-oriented integration, they have a higher level of mental health. They are lower depression, higher life satisfaction, and a higher social support. And if you are urban-oriented integration group, you actually have higher SES, you have higher income, and you have better housing conditions. And if you go to the C4 marginalization risk separation, you are more likely to be depressed. So mental health is much lower. So that is, if you compare the four clusters, they really stand out. They have difference among the four groups. And this will show our the last model of path analysis to show that acculturation does impact the life stratification through the major three passes, three routes. So that's our argument. So from this study, we actually this is actually a kind of research project sponsored by the national government. They want to see, because 4 years ago, two ministries merged, Ministry of Family Planning and Ministry of Public Health. Right now, they merged one Ministry of Public Health. So they said we want to do something. Family planning people said we want to do something for health. So that's why I said, oh, we did integration with the German people. So right now, whether we can do something beyond integration, whether we can do something for the health of the migrants. That's why we want to look at how integration affects mental health of the migrants. We also made a lot of proposals to the Chinese government. Very lastly, I'm going using about 5 to 10 minutes to show you that how Chinese researchers doing academic research and policy analysis for the local governments. Because in China, the governance system is very complicated. People feel that China is a very unanimous country, that the central policy from central government, top down to everywhere, implemented very well. It's kind of no resistance. Nobody can say no. Actually, they may say yes, but they may do differently. I want to show you that how policy is promoted by the national government. How do they go to the local governments at provincial level, at a city level? So I will show you that one evaluation study that asked by our provincial government, they want to evaluate how the local governments at the city level, how do they adopt the national policy? How do they implement policy? They want to compare, then they want to improve the policy implementation. So basically want to see social integration of migrants into urban society. So we did a very interesting study that we used the EU index system. I'm not sure, because this is what we learned from the when we work with German partners. We learned that we adopted the EU Migrant Integration Policy Index. So we adapt this policy index into Chinese context. So we have, for the provincial government, we have a policy deployment, because policy is usually coming from the central government, from the party, from the parliament, from the Congress, and from the state council. But in China, when policy comes into the provincial level, they have to say that, oh, we have our own modification of the policy. So we call it policy deployment. Then we go to the lower level, we have policy implementation. So we have three. This is the first level indicator. Then we have secondary indicator that what we call institution building is actually also capacity building. In Chinese system, that we want to see whether you have a leading group, whether you can mobilize resources, you can mobilize power of different ministries, because migrant workers are very, very complicated issue in China. Not only can be taken care of by one ministry. The leading committee of on migrant workers in state council involves more than 20 ministries, education, health, everything. So here we have third level indicator like working maximum policy. They have basic public policy and rights and interest. So for instance, that in China, if a migrant worker works for one company, sometimes the bosses don't want to have contract with you, because if you don't have contract, I don't need to pay anything for you, except salary. I don't need to pay pension. I don't need to pay the medical care. I don't need to pay unemployment, so insurance. So that's why we want to see that whether rights and interests are protected by the policy. So then we have policy implementation. So we have a 100-point scale. I just want to show you. This is a kind of province. So from 0 to 100 is the full scale. We have 13 cities. So you can see that overall, they are not exceeding the 60. 60 in China is kind of threshold. That if above 60, you are qualified. You have qualified. You have better and excellency. But if you are under 60, you are not qualified. That means you are doing very poor in the policy deployment and policy implementation. So that's overall that central government policy there is very good. But if you go to the local governments at a lower level, we see the policy is not what they are expecting. These are not from us. These are from the respondents of farmers, migrants. Then it's also interesting to see that policy deployment is quite high, around 80 across all cities. But the policy implementation is much lower, only around 40 to 50. So you see that difference between the policy deployment and policy implementation. So that's why in China we always say that laws there, policy there, but very people observe and very people monitor, and very few people will try to account for who should be responsible for the poor performance of the policy. And here we also, I just want to use one example to show you that, regular common people, especially farmer migrants, they usually say that education is very poor because my children cannot go to local school. But actually, housing security is the poorest. So it's different from what you observe and what you learn from the media and the papers, and especially social media. So education is quite well. It might be a different story. It might be students or children who cannot come to attend school. They go back. They are in the rural area. So that's why who stayed in the urban area, they feel good because while they stay, they can go to school. Those who cannot go to school, they go back. So that's one area. And also you see that for implementation on rights and interest, protection is the lowest on a 100-point scale. So that is I want to show you that how policy is launched at a national level. And it goes from top to the down to the provincial level to the city level. It's very much different. It's very much different. And we actually wrote a report, internal report. This one I didn't distribute because in Chinese, also for the domestic internal use for government policymakers. So we wrote a big report, and also we wrote a 2-page summary, and what the questions, what are the status, what are the problems, and what kind of proposals that we made for the provincial government. So in Chinese system that we have a specific system that's called, if important person writes something on a report, that means your research, your knowledge turns into practice. So our report to the provincial governor, and he said, this is very important. You need to work more to see how to improve the implementation policy, how do you really turn the policy into improving the human well-being of the local or migrant, the farmer migrants. So in future, I think the challenge is still there. I think right now the number one issue regarding the human well-being and migration is mostly hukou system. So if you are interested, you can go to the Google or Chinese Baidu to see how newly released hukou reform policies by central government. Yeah, they are expecting that hukou system won't be eliminated, abolished, but it will be improved. That means everybody may have a hukou as much as they want in the location where they want to stay. So in future, that hukou may go with you when you migrate. That's the eventual objective of the state policy, national policy. They also want to make sure that when you have a local hukou there, you can also have the local benefits. Right now, we within the hukou system, we have what we call the permit system. That means, for instance, that in Shenzhen, the Shenzhen that bordering with Hong Kong, is a regular residents about 20 million, but only around a couple million people have real local hukou. Then about 10 million people, they don't have hukou, but they have a residential permit. So it's kind of something between hukou and non-hukou. So in future, that I hope that this kind of hukou reform can continue. So that's all for today's talk, and I hope that through this talk, you can understand what's going on in China in terms of demography today. But it's not only regarding the demography, but also demography, economics, and social development, and also human well-being part of China. Thank you very much.